Hey, how's it going, everybody? So today we're going to read some Engels, some Frederick Engels, and this is a very important piece because this piece really was a very foundational model. Like it was a foundational writing, a foundational idea to what became the Soviet model of democracy. And which made dictatorship of the proletariat over the bourgeoisie possible. This is this is the 1891 introduction by Frederick Engels on the 20th anniversary of the Paris Commune. And one of my favorite phrases that Lenin says, one of my favorite quotes is in here, and we'll get to it. But I say Lenin it's always been one of my favorite Lenin quotes. But he got it from this. A part, I mean, a large, like, he got pretty much all of it from this, but a part of it also comes from the Communist Manifesto, and we'll talk about that at the end. So let's go ahead and get into this. This is the 1891 introduction by Frederick Engels on the 20th anniversary of the Paris Commune. So let's go ahead and get into this. It says a postscript. This is about the Paris Commune. It says, I did not anticipate that I would be asked to prepare a new edition of the address of the General Council of the International on the Civil War in France, and to write an introduction to it. Therefore, I can only touch briefly here on the most important points. I am prefacing the longer work mentioned above by the two shorter addresses of the General Council of the Franco-Prussian War, Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. In the first place, because the second of these, which itself cannot be fully understood without the first, is referred to in the Civil War, italics, the Civil War. But also because these two addresses, likewise drafted by Marx, are no less than the Civil War outstanding examples of the author's remarkable gift, first proved in the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, for grasping clearly the character, the import, and the necessary consequences of great historical events at a time when these events are still in process before our eyes, or have only just taken place. And finally, because we in Germany are still having to endure the consequences which Marx prophesied would follow from these events. Has that which was declared in the first address not come to pass, that of Germany's defensive war against Louis Bonaparte degenerate into a war of conquest against the French people, all the misfortunes which befell Germany after the so-called wars of liberation would revive again with renewed intensity? Have we not had a further 20 years of Bismarck's government, the exceptional law, and the anti-socialist campaign taking the place of the prosecutions of demagogues, with the same arbitrary police measures, and with literally the same staggering interpretations of the law? And has not the prophecy been proved to the letter that the annexation of Alsace-Lorraine would, quote, force France into the arms of Russia, end quote, and that after this annexation, Germany must either become the avowed tool of Russia, or must, after some short respite, arm for a new war, and moreover, quote, a race war against the combined Slavonic and Roman races, end quote. Has not the annexation of the French provinces driven France into the arms of Russia? Has not Bismarck for fully 20 years vainly wooed the favor of the Tsar, wooed it with services even more lowly than those which little Prussia, before it became the first power in Europe, was wont to lay at Holy Russia's feet? And is there not every day hanging over our heads the Damocles, sword of war, the Damocles, I'm not sure how exactly to say that, Damocles, sword of war, on the first day of which all the chartered covenants of princes would be scattered like chaff, a war of which nothing is certain but the absolute uncertainty of its outcome, a race war which will subject the whole of Europe to devastation by 15 or 20 million armed men, and is only not already raging because even the strongest of the greatest military states shrinks before the absolute incalculability of its final outcome. All the more it is our duty to make again accessible to the German workers these brilliant proofs, now half forgotten, of the far-sightedness of the international working class policy in 1870. What is true of these two addresses is also true of the Civil War in France. On May 28, the last fighters of the Commune succumbed to superior forces on the slopes of Belleville. And only 2 days later, on May 30th, Marx read to the General Council the work in which the historical significance of the Paris Commune is delineated in short, powerful strokes, but with such clearness, and above all such truth, as has never again been attained on all the mass of literature which has been written on the subject. If today we look back at the activity and historical significance of the Paris Commune of 1871, we shall find it necessary to make a few additions to the account given in the Civil War in France. The members of the Commune were divided into a majority of the Blanquists, who had also been predominant in the Central Committee of the National Guard, and a minority, members of the International Working Men's Association, chiefly consisting of adherents of the Proudhon school of socialism. The great majority of the Blanquists at that time were socialists only by revolutionary and proletarian instinct. Only a few had attained greater clarity on the essential principles, through Vaillant, who was familiar with German scientific socialism. It is therefore comprehensible that in the economic sphere much was left undone, which, according to our view today, the Commune ought to have done. The hardest thing to understand is certainly the holy awe with which they remained standing respectfully outside the gates of the Bank of France. This was also a serious political mistake. The bank in the hands of the Commune. This would have been worth more than 10,000 hostages. It would have meant the pressure of the whole of the French bourgeoisie on the Versailles government in favor of peace with the Commune. What is still more wonderful is the correctness of so much that was actually done by the Commune, composed as it was of Blanquists and Proudhonists. Naturally, the Proudhonists were chiefly responsible for the economic decrees of the Commune, both for their praiseworthy and their unpraiseworthy aspects, as the Blanquists were for its political actions and omissions. And in both cases, the irony of history willed, as is usual when doctrinaires come to the helm, that both did the opposite of what the doctrines of their school prescribed. Proudhon, the socialist of the small peasant and master craftsman, regarded association with positive hatred. He said of it that there was more bad than good in it, and that it was by nature sterile, even harmful, because it was a fetter on the freedom of the workers, and that it was a pure dogma, unproductive and burdensome, in conflict as much with the freedom of the workers as with economy of labor, that its disadvantages multiplied more swiftly than its advantages, that, as compared with it, competition, division of labor, and private property were economic forces. Only for the exceptional case, as Proudhon called them, of large-scale industry and large industrial units, such as railways, was there any place for the association of workers. By 1871, even in Paris, so the site that's CFAD Général de la Révolution, 3 études. By 1871, even in Paris, the center of handicrafts, large-scale industry had already so much ceased to be an exceptional case that by far the most important decree of the Commune instituted an organization of large-scale industry and even of manufacture, which was not based only on the association of workers in each factory, but also aimed at combining all these associations in one great union. In short, an organization which, as Marx quite rightly says in the Civil War, must necessarily have led in the end to communism. That is to say, the direct antithesis of the Proudhon doctrine. And therefore, the Commune was also the grave of the Proudhon school of socialism. Today, this school has vanished from French working-class circles, among them now among the possibilists, no less than among the Marxists. Marxist theory rules unchallenged. Only among the radical bourgeoisie are there still Proudhonists. The Blanquists fared no better, brought up in the school of conspiracy, and held together by the strict discipline which went with it. They started out from the viewpoint that a relatively small number of resolute, well-organized men would be able at a given favorable moment not only to seize the helm of state, but also by energetic and relentless action, to keep power until they succeeded in drawing the mass of the people into the revolution and ranging them round the small band of leaders. This conception involved, above all, the strictest dictatorship and centralization of all power in the hands of the new revolutionary government. And what did the Commune, with its majority of these same Blanquists, actually do? In all its proclamations to the French in the provinces, it appealed to them to form a free federation of all French communes with Paris, a national organization, which for the first time was really to be created by the nation itself. It was precisely the oppressing power of the former centralized government, army, political police, and bureaucracy, which Napoleon had created in 1798, and since then had been taken over by every new government as a welcome instrument and used against its opponents. It was precisely this power which was to fall everywhere, just as it had already fallen in Paris. From the outset, the Commune was compelled to recognize that the working class, once come to power, could not manage with the old state machine. That in order not to lose again its only just conquered supremacy, this working class must, on the one hand, do away with all the old repressive machinery previously used against it itself, and on the other, safeguard itself against its own deputies and officials by declaring them all, without exception, subject to recall at any moment. What had been the characteristic attribute of the former state? Society had created its own organs to look after its common interests, originally through simple division of labor. But these organs, at whose head was the state power, had in the course of time, in pursuance of their own special interests, transformed themselves from the servants of society into the masters of society, as can be seen, for example, not only in the hereditary monarchy, but equally also in the democratic republic. Nowhere do, quote, politicians, end quote, form a more separate powerful section of the nation than in North America. They're each of the two great parties which alternately succeed each other, and power is itself in turn controlled by people who make a business of politics, who speculate on seats of the legislative assemblies of the Union as well as of the separate states, or who make a living by carrying on agitation for their party, and on its victory are rewarded with positions. It is well known that the Americans have been striving for 30 years to shake off this yoke, which has become intolerable, and that in spite of all they can do to continue to sink deep, they continue to sink even deeper in the swamp of corruption. It is precisely in America that we see best how there takes place this process of the state power making itself independent in relation to society, whose mere instrument it was originally intended to be. I think it's funny, he says deeper in the swamp of corruption, because it's, I know, that's what Trump calls it. That's what Trump calls it. I mean, Trump's a part of the swamp, but he calls it a swamp of corruption. It's just funny. That's like Trump and Engels they both call it the swamp, entirely, over a century apart from each other. But they both call the lobbyists and, Hillary Clinton's donors the swamp, a swamp of corruption, Okay, anyway. Whose mere instrument it is originally intended to be. Here there exists no dynasty, no nobility, no standing army, beyond the few men keeping watch on the Native American, on the Indians, no bureaucracy with permanent posts or the right to pensions. And nevertheless, we find here two great gangs of political speculators who alternately take possession of the state power and exploit it by the most corrupt means and for the most corrupt ends. And the nation is powerless against these two great cartels of politicians who are ostensibly its servants, but in reality exploit and plunder it. Against this transformation of the state and the organs of the state from servants of society into masters of society, our inevitable transformation in all previous states, the Commune made use of two infallible expedients. In this first place, it filled all posts, administrative, judicial, and educational, by election on the basis of universal suffrage of all concerned, with the right of the same electors to recall their delegate at any time. And in the second place, all officials, high or low, were paid only the wages received by other workers. The highest salary paid by the Commune to anyone was 6,000 francs. In this way, an effective barrier to place hunting and careerism was set up, even apart from the biting mandates to delegates, to representative bodies, which were also added in profusion. The shattering of the former state power and its replacement by a new and really democratic state is described in detail in the third section of the Civil War. But it was necessary to dwell briefly here once more on some of its features, because in Germany particularly, the superstitious belief in the state has been carried over from philosophy into the general consciousness of the bourgeoisie and even to many workers. According to the philosophical notion, the state is the realization of the idea. Quote, the state is the realization of the idea, end quote, or the kingdom of God on earth, translated into philosophical terms. That the sphere in which eternal truth and justice is or should be realized. And from this follows a superstitious reference. Okay, so this is where this quote from Lenin, one of my favorite quotes from Lenin, you can see where he gets this, where he says, follows a superstitious reference. And from this follows a superstitious reference for the state and everything connected to it, which takes roots the more readily as people from their childhood are accustomed to imagine that the affairs and interests common to the whole of society cannot be looked after otherwise than as they have been looked after in the past, that is, through the state and its well-paid officials. And people think they have taken quite an extraordinary bold step forward when they have rid themselves of belief in hereditary monarchy and swear by the democratic republic. In reality, however, the state is nothing but a machine for the oppression of one class by another. And indeed, in the democratic republic, no less than in the monarchy, and at best an evil inherited by the proletariat after its victorious struggle for class supremacy, whose worst sides, the proletariat, just like the Commune, cannot avoid having to lop off the earliest possible moment until such time as a new generation reared in new and free social conditions will be able to throw the entire lumber of the state on the scrap heap. So my favorite, one of my favorite lines from Lenin has always been, for as long as I've read Lenin, it's always been, never believe in the superstition of the state, and remember that also in a democratic republic, and not only in a monarchy, the state is merely a machine for the suppression of one class by another. It's kind of just that last paragraph I just read. I mean, part of it also comes from, also comes from the Communist Manifesto, I think, where either Marx or Engels says that, a political force is just, politics is just the suppression of one class by another. This kind of takes it further, what he says here, And that quote by Lenin is from, Lenin, quote unquote, democracy and dictatorship. That's where this is definitely where he gets that phrase from, because it doesn't mention the superstition or the state being the idea. Is the realization of the idea. You can kind of see here, that like the state being the ideal above all is kind of stems from this philosophical notion that the state is the realization of the idea, and the state being the ideal above all is fascism. That's what fascism is itself. It kind of takes it from Hegel's belief that the state is the realization of the idea. It stems from that, but Marx takes Hegel's dialectics and puts it upside down. He does something entirely different with it. But the state being the realization of the idea, or the kingdom of God on earth, translated in the philosophical terms. That's where fascism stems from, is the idea that the state is like supposed to be the nation's idea, like basically it's the ideal above all. Like it's supposed to be the nation. It's supposed to be the nation holding itself as the ultimate ideal. It does this through a state. So that's why, they, in fascism, it's just like rapid war all the time, and concentration camps, and all kinds of patriarchy and all kinds of reaction, because it's making the state, culturally forces itself as the ideal. It's not just culturally. I mean, it does it culturally. Like it always grabs political opposition, and it basically, there's a state monopoly on ideas during fascism, and so you can't counter anything that the state wants to do, and the state's still going to be under the power of the bourgeoisie, and it's usually they say it's what happens when capitalism decays, is when liberalism that falls apart becomes into fascism. So there's a little bit more to this. Let's go ahead and finish it. It says, of late, the social democratic Philistine has once more been filled with the wholesome terror at the words, dictatorship of the proletariat. Well and good, gentlemen. Do you want to know what this dictatorship looks like? Look at the Paris Commune. That was the dictatorship of the proletariat. Frederick Engels. London, on the 20th anniversary of the Paris Commune, March 18th, 1891. What an incredible writing. That is such an important piece to read and read again, and read to others, and for people to examine over. What a history-changing, critique. So there's a few notes down here. It says, at the time Engels wrote the introduction, he was writing for the large audience who had already read the popular book by Marx. His intention was to give new historical data, making for a preface that would remind readers of the content inside the book, but also provide additional postscript information to prompt the reader to reread the work in whole. In this publication, we have to put the postscript information into this file, and the historical background and detailed account of the Civil War into the introduction. In the original document, the introductory information was placed before the section break above, i.e. following the paragraph ending, as has never again been attained on all the mass of literature which has been written on the subject. So this is the second note. The National Liberation War of the German people against Napoleon's rule in 1813 to 1814. I guess that was, what he was talking about at the beginning there. And it says, see, in the 1820s, Germany demagogues was applied to the participants in the opposition movement among the German intelligentsia, who came out against the reactionary political system in the German states and advocated the unification of Germany. Demagogues were ruthlessly persecuted by the authorities. Okay. So yeah, that is the 1891 introduction by Frederick Engels on the 20th anniversary of the Paris Commune. So, yeah, well, thank y'all for tuning in, It's been great. Y'all can follow me online, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Tumblr, Medium. All of these are Marxist, so y'all can hit me up there. Y'all have a great day, and Lodata Goy.